3 miles. It's a distance we usually measure in minutes on a highway, but when that distance is vertical straight down into the crushing, freezing pressure of the Central Pacific, it becomes a journey to another world. A world where time stopped on June 5th, 1942. For 81 years, the flagship of the most feared carrier strike force in history lay in total silence. The Akagi, or the Red Castle, was the pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy, a vessel that moved with a lethal grace across the waves. To the Americans who survived the morning of the 7th of December 1941, she was a ghost that had haunted the Pacific, a symbol of a day that changed the world forever. In late 2023, a team of explorers using advanced deep-sea robotics did what many thought was impossible. They didn't just find a shipwreck, they found a graveyard of steel that rewrites our understanding of the most pivotal naval battle in human history. To see the Akagi today, resting nearly 17,000 feet below the surface, is to look into the eyes of history itself. To understand why the discovery of the Akagi is so significant to historians and veterans alike, we have to understand what this ship represented. The Akagi wasn't born as an aircraft carrier. She was laid down in 1920 as an Amagi-class battlecruiser, a massive, 800-foot-long predator designed to hunt and destroy enemy ships with 16-inch guns. However, the Washington Naval Treaty of 1922 forced a change in plans. Rather than scrapping her, the Imperial Japanese Navy converted her into a floating airfield. Early in her life, she was a bizarre sight, featuring 3 flight decks stacked on top of each other. This experimental design was meant to allow planes to take off from lower levels while others landed above. By 1935, the Japanese realized this was impractical and underwent a massive reconstruction, installing a single, massive flight deck stretching nearly 817 feet. One of her most distinct features was her downward curving funnel on the starboard side, designed to keep smoke away from the flight deck, a detail that ROV pilots would eventually use to identify her in the abyss. By 1941, she was the flagship of the Kido Butai, the first air fleet. Under the command of Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, she wasn't just a ship, she was the centerpiece of a new kind of warfare that rendered the era of the battleship obsolete. For many veterans, the name Akagi is inseparable from the date which will live in infamy. On the morning of December 7th, the Akagi sat in the choppy waters north of Oahu. On her decks, the air grew thick with the smell of aviation fuel and the roar of Nakajima B-5N Kate torpedo bombers. This was the moment the Akagi moved from a marvel of naval engineering to a symbol of global conflict. Her air group was elite, consisting of the most experienced naval aviators in the world. During the first wave, Akagi's torpedo planes targeted the backbone of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, while her dive bombers pummeled the airfields in the second wave. When the planes returned and the Akagi turned west, she left behind a transformed world and a sleeping giant that was now wide awake. For the next 6 months, the Akagi seemed invincible. She moved through the Indian Ocean and toward the shores of Australia, striking at will and evading retaliation. The ship became a legend of maritime power, a floating fortress that the U.S. Navy desperately sought to neutralize. But the tide of war is fickle, and the Japanese leadership grew overconfident in their ghost of Pearl Harbor. As the summer of 1942 approached, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto set his sights on a tiny coral outpost called Midway. It was meant to be a trap for the remaining American carriers, but through a combination of brilliant intelligence work and sheer luck, the roles were about to be reversed. The Akagi was sailing toward her final destination, unaware that 17,000 feet of water was waiting to claim her. The morning of the 4th of June, 1942, began with a deceptive sense of triumph for the crew of the Akagi. They had launched a massive strike against the American base at Midway, and their CAP combat air patrol was successfully swatted away a series of disorganized attacks by American torpedo bombers. However, the Japanese deck crews were trapped in a logistical nightmare. Admiral Nagumo, oscillating between fearing an American carrier presence and needing to strike the island again, ordered his planes to be rearmed. On the hangar decks of the Akagi, high-explosive ground bombs were being swapped for oxygen-fueled Type 91 torpedoes, and then back again. Because of the rush, the discarded munitions weren't secured in the magazines. They were stacked openly on the deck alongside fueled and armed aircraft. This created a powder keg of staggering proportions, turning the Red Castle into a fragile box of explosives just as the tide of the battle shifted. At 10:22 a.m., the 5 minutes of fate began. While the Japanese Zeros were preoccupied at low altitudes with the American torpedo squadrons, 3 squadrons of SBD, dauntless dive bombers from the USS Enterprise and USS Yorktown, screamed down from 14,000 feet, unnoticed until it was too late. Lieutenant Richard Dick Best and 2 of his wingmen focused their sights on the Akagi. Despite the ship's massive size, it took only 2 near misses and 1 direct hit to seal her doom. The fatal blow struck the aft edge of the middle elevator. The 1,000-pound bomb didn't just cause structural damage, it plummeted into the upper hangar deck, detonating in the midst of the fueled B-5N Kate bombers and the unsecured stacks of munitions. The resulting chain reaction was catastrophic. A massive internal fireball raced through the ship, fueled by aviation gas and the very torpedoes meant for the American fleet. The Akagi did not sink immediately, but she was paralyzed. The explosions had jammed her rudder, and the fire main system was shattered, leaving the crew unable to fight the inferno that was now melting the steel of the flight deck. For hours, Captain Aoki and his damage control teams fought a losing battle against a fire that fed on itself. By nightfall, Admiral Yamamoto, realizing that his flagship was a burnt-out husk that could not be saved or towed, made the agonizing decision to scuttle her. He could not risk the pride of the fleet falling into American hands or remaining a drifting tomb. In the early hours of June 5, 4 Japanese destroyers, Nowaki, Arashi, Hagikaze, and Maikaze, fired torpedoes into her side. The Akagi slipped beneath the waves, bow first, vanishing into the 4-mile deep darkness of the Midway Basin, taking 267 of her crew with her. For decades, the Akagi existed only in grainy photographs and the memories of the few who survived her final night. The depth of the Pacific at the sinking site, nearly 17,000 feet, made her virtually inaccessible. To put that in perspective, the Titanic lies at roughly 12,500 feet. At the Akagi's depth, the pressure is over 7,500 pounds per square inch, and the temperature hovers just above freezing. It wasn't until 2019 that the first sonar images suggested her location, but it wasn't until the 2023 expedition by the Vulcan Incorporated team and the E.V. Nautilus that the world finally saw her again. Using the ROV Hercules, the team navigated the pitch-black abyss, their lights eventually catching the massive, upright hull of the ship. The footage revealed a haunting sight. The Red Castle was remarkably intact, sitting upright on the seafloor, her massive bow looming out of the silt like a mountain of rusted iron. The discovery provided chilling technical insights into her final moments. The ROV surveyed the flight deck, showing the massive jagged hole where Dick Best's bomb had ended her career. Most poignantly, the cameras captured the ship's 25mm anti-aircraft guns, still pointed toward the surface, forever frozen in a defensive posture against the dive bombers that never left. The woodwork of the flight deck had long since been consumed by wood-boring organisms, leaving behind the skeletal steel beams that once supported the most elite air group in the world. As the ROV moved along the hull, the sheer scale of the ship became apparent, a silent monument to the 267 men who vanished with her. This wasn't just a search for wreckage. It was a forensic investigation into a battle that defined the modern world, proving that even after 81 years, the ghost of Pearl Harbor still had stories to tell. The 2023 expedition to the Akagi was more than a technical feat. It was a high-stakes mission of historical recovery that pushed the limits of modern deep-sea exploration. Led by the Ocean Exploration Trust aboard the E.V. Nautilus, the team utilized the ROV Hercules and its sister vehicle Atalanta to descend into the pitch-black Midway Basin. This wasn't a blind search. The wreck had been roughly located by sonar in 2019 by Vulcan Incorporated, but no human eyes had seen the ship since 1942. At a depth of over 16,600 feet, the pressure is so immense that even the most advanced submersibles risk catastrophic failure. The ROV pilots had to navigate with extreme precision, as the silty seafloor could be disturbed by the slightest thruster movement, potentially masking the very evidence they traveled thousands of miles to find. When the massive hull of the Akagi finally appeared in the ROV's high-definition LED beams, the sight was hauntingly magnificent. The ship sits upright, its massive bow emerging from the sediment like a cathedral of rusted iron. One of the most striking discoveries was the Imperial chrysanthemum, the kikuman, still visible on the bow, a symbol of the ship's status as a vessel of the Emperor. As the ROV ascended toward the flight deck, the extent of the damage from the Battle of Midway became clear. The 14-hour survey revealed that while the hull remains largely intact, the upper hangar decks are a twisted labyrinth of scorched steel. The team observed 127mm twin anti-aircraft guns still in their mounts, some frozen in an upward-pointing angle, a silent testament to the crew's desperate final stand against the American dive bombers. The mission was guided by a global team of over 100 experts via telepresence, including historians from both the United States and Japan. This collaborative effort was crucial, as the Akagi is not merely a shipwreck, it is a protected war grave. Before the ROV made its descent, the crew of the Nautilus held a protocol ceremony to honor those who lost their lives. For many families of the 267 men who went down with the ship, the livestream provided a first-ever look at the final resting place of their ancestors. In Japan, where the Akagi is a symbol of both immense pride and tragic loss, the footage was met with a deep sense of reverence. The discovery bridged a gap of 80 years, transforming a name in a history book back into a tangible, physical reality that could finally be mourned. Technically, the survey provided data that will keep naval architects and historians busy for decades. By using photogrammetry, the team began building a three-dimensional model of the wreck, allowing them to analyze the sinking-related damage caused when the ship was scuttled by Japanese torpedoes. They found evidence of internal explosions so powerful they had peeled back sections of the hangar walls like paper. This physical evidence confirms the harrowing accounts of survivors who described a hell of fire trapped within the ship's enclosed hangars. The Akagi today is a graveyard of secrets, where the oxygen-free environment of the deep ocean has preserved details from the specific rivets on the hull to the surviving gun tubs that would have vanished in shallower waters. As the ROV Hercules finally began its long ascent back to the surface, it left the Akagi once again in the total darkness of the abyss. But the ghost of Pearl Harbor is a ghost no longer. Through the lens of 21st century technology, we have been granted a final, sobering look at a vessel that once held the fate of the Pacific in its hangars. The discovery reminds us that the scars of war do not just exist in the minds of veterans or the pages of archives. They are etched into the steel of ships resting 3 miles down. The Akagi remains there, a silent, iron monument to a turning point in history, a red castle that finally returned to the light, if only for a few hours, to tell the world its story one last time. The tactical tragedy of the Akagi at Midway was not merely the result of American bravery, but a catastrophic failure of the Japanese grand battle doctrine. For years, the Imperial Japanese Navy had operated under the belief that a single, decisive strike would force the United States to the negotiating table. This overconfidence led to a fatal lack of reconnaissance. On the morning of June 4th, Admiral Nagumo's decision-making was hampered by a rigid adherence to hierarchy and a lack of flexibility. While the Akagi boasted the world's most advanced carrier air group, its defense was dangerously lopsided. The Japanese relied almost exclusively on their A-6M0 fighters for protection, neglecting the development of radar and high-altitude anti-aircraft fire control systems that the Americans were already beginning to master. On the hangar decks, the rearming shuffle, the frantic switching of torpedoes for land-use bombs, was a symptom of a command structure that had lost the initiative. This logistical chaos turned the ship's interior into a labyrinth of high explosives and fuel lines, ensuring that even a single hit would be terminal. The Akagi was designed to dish out incredible punishment, but its internal architecture was never intended to survive a fire that bypassed its flight deck armor. When we look at the 2023 ROV footage of the Akagi's hull, we are seeing the remains of a naval philosophy that prioritized speed and striking power over survivability. The ship's 127mm Type 89 dual-purpose guns, which are clearly visible in the deep-sea imagery, were among the best in the world at the time, yet they were hampered by a slow rate of fire and manual loading processes that could not keep up with the dive-bombing tactics of the U.S. Navy. The ROV's high-definition cameras captured the mounts of these guns, showing how the saltwater corrosion has claimed the steel over 81 years, yet the silhouettes remain unmistakable. Near the stern, the wreckage reveals the massive propellers that once pushed the 36,000-ton behemoth through the water at speeds of up to 31 knots. These propellers are now partially buried in the Midway Basin's fine silt, frozen in the moment they stopped spinning as the engine rooms flooded. For a naval enthusiast, these mechanical details are the true ghosts of the ship engineering marvels that were state-of-the-art in 1942, now reduced to silent monuments in a desert of abyssal mud. Image showing the technical deck layout of the Akagi compared to the USS Enterprise. The discovery also highlights a fascinating aspect of deep-sea preservation, the Teredo worm effect. In shallower wrecks, the wooden flight decks are the first things to go, consumed by wood-boring organisms. At 17,000 feet, however, the environment is so hostile and the temperature so low that the breakdown of materials happens at a glacial pace. While the organic wood of the Akagi's flight deck has long since vanished, the underlying steel structure remains incredibly well preserved. The ROV identified the heavy steel girders that supported the massive flight deck, showing the exact points where the deck buckled under the heat of the 1,000-pound bomb's detonation. This allows historians to perform a digital autopsy of the ship. We can see that the fire didn't just burn through the ship, it structurally melted it from the inside out. The heat was so intense that it likely exceeded 1,000 degrees Celsius in the enclosed hangars, causing the steel beams to lose their structural integrity and collapse into the engine spaces below. This explains why survivors spoke of the ship moaning and screaming as it died, the sound of thousands of tons of steel twisting and snapping under the weight of the fires. The 2023 expedition also shed light on the final moments of the 267 men who perished with the ship. Unlike the Titanic, which is a civilian disaster site, the Akagi is a sovereign war grave. The EV Nautilus team treated the site with a level of reverence that is rare in modern exploration. The ROV avoided entering the hull, instead using external sensors to map the perimeter. This respect is vital, especially for the Japanese families who still honor their ancestors at the Yasukuni Shrine. To them, the Akagi is not a relic. It is a tomb for the young sailors who were caught in the hangar deck infernos or remained at their posts in the engine rooms to keep the pumps running until the very end. The presence of the Imperial chrysanthemum on the bow, though weathered, serves as a poignant reminder of the duty and sacrifice these men felt toward their nation, regardless of the political causes of the war. Seeing that gold leaf symbol through the blue-green haze of a deep-sea camera lens is perhaps the most emotional moment of the entire discovery, linking the modern world to a vanished empire. Furthermore, the discovery of the Akagi must be viewed in the context of the wider Midway graveyard. Only a few miles away lies the wreckage of her sister ship, the Kaga, which was located in 2019. Together, these two ships represent the loss of half of the Kido Butai's carrier strength in a single day. The 2023 mission spent significant time comparing the damage between the two vessels. While the Kaga was hit more times and suffered a more immediate structural collapse, the Akagi's death was a slow, agonizing process. The ROV footage shows that the Akagi's hull is more upright and intact than the Kaga's, which suggests that she sank more gracefully after being scuttled. This technical comparison is invaluable for researchers trying to simulate the sinking dynamics of large warships. It provides a real-world data point that contradicts some earlier historical theories that the Akagi had broken apart on her way to the bottom. Instead, she hit the seafloor as a single, massive entity, creating a massive impact crater that is still visible in the sonar data today. As we analyze the final high-definition sweeps of the wreckage, we are reminded of the fragility of even the most powerful machines. The Akagi was the invincible flagship that had terrorized the Pacific, yet she was brought down by a handful of American pilots who refused to give up. For the veterans who served on the American carriers Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown, the discovery of the Akagi provides a sense of closure to a story that began in the smoke of Pearl Harbor. It validates the accounts of the SBD Dauntless pilots who reported seeing the Red Castle wreathed in flames as they pulled out of their dives. The wreckage serves as a physical witness to their testimony. Every rivet, every bent plate of armor, and every silent gun tub tells a story of a battle that was won and lost on the narrowest of margins. The Akagi didn't just disappear in 1942. She waited in the darkness for the world to be ready to see her again, providing a bridge between the living memory of the greatest generation and the digital age of the 21st century. The future of the Akagi site is one of quiet observation. There are no plans to raise the ship, nor should there be. The cost would be astronomical, but more importantly, the site is a sanctuary of historical truth. In an era where history is often debated or rewritten, the physical reality of the Akagi at 17,000 feet is an undeniable fact. It stands as a warning about the costs of overextension and the brutal reality of naval warfare. As the silt continues to settle over the rusted flight deck and the deep-sea currents slowly wear away at the hull, the Akagi will remain the ultimate ghost of the Pacific, a ship that defined the start of a war and whose discovery, 81 years later, helps us finally understand its end. The mission of the EV Nautilus has closed the book on the search, but for historians, the study of the Red Castle is only just beginning.